Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and for attending our webinar. So my name is Francisco. I work at Market as a business development manager, and we have never had so many people joining our webinars. This is the fifth one that we do. So thanks a lot for joining and for showing interests in doing science from home. So jumping into the agenda for today, we will talk about common people challenges because before being a scientist, scientists are common people, and then also more related to the scientist challenges. We'll also touch on those and to also mention solutions that you can implement to be able to do science from home, even though you can't go to the lab. And then later on, I would just like to show you a brief glance into the future of remote science and what things could look like in some years from now on. And then we'll just have a 10 minutes Q&A and discussion in case anyone has something to add. So I would please ask you to write on the chat and any questions that you have. And if you want to be included in the discussion and want to say something and share some thoughts with the people, just say it. And I will unmute so you can speak, so we can manage everyone in the call. So yeah, as I said, I'm a scientist as well, apart from being a business development manager. I have a master's in bioengineering. And after the presentation, I'm also available to give you a demo session of the software if you're interested in Book It. I'll talk about more Book It in a second. So, but just to start with common challenges, I think these are the challenges that everyone is facing right now. So they're quite common. They go to different levels according to the person, but I think they're quite common. So the lack of a routine, because we stopped doing what we were doing, and you might are waking up later now. You don't wake up always at the same time. You don't have breakfast always at the same time. Maybe you start working and then have breakfast afterwards. And this all these changes, they lead to changes in productivity, of course. So it's a challenge to keep them high, and also for you to keep focused to avoid distractions, especially if you have kids, for example. Being at home can be hard in order to do some work and being productive. And maybe you also tend to take too long breaks or too many. So these are common challenges, and it's completely normal. And on top of these, of course, that work-life balance becomes a little bit blurry. So you might start working earlier, and then if you have some work, maybe you just go on and working through the nights. So it gets also tricky to manage it. And then, of course, because you don't have your colleagues sitting next to you or your lab members right next to you, you can not just start talking to them right away. So you need to call them, they need to be available. Then both of you need to have a good internet connection so you don't have any issues in communicating. So communication also gets challenging right now. And also everything builds up on not getting frustrated and staying motivated. So I think this is a challenge itself. More specific challenges that scientists face is that a scientist that is normally doing work in a wet lab, when there's no lab, there's no experiments, there's no work. This is not necessarily true, and this is exactly my point with the webinar today. So I hope I can show you that you can still do some work, you can still do science, even though you can't go to the lab. But regarding the research itself, of course, that most of this work stays on hold. Your research gets delayed, and with that comes some stress and anxiety because you can't wait to go to the lab and start working. So you also have troubles staying motivated like a common person, but it's more difficult because the work that you were used to do, you can't do it anymore until you go back to the lab. So, and if the work is not being done, of course, that deadlines are not being met. And then if you rely on fellowships or funding grants, these might run out as well. And even though you think your scientific output will be reduced or even zero, I want to show you that you can still have scientific output even though you can't go to the lab. So with this, I want to show you today, this is my goal for today, to show you all the things that you can do at home to be productive be safe, and still do science. So first things first, common tips for everyone. So one, it's all about routines. So we just talked about the routines and having to build new routines because the old ones are not already in place anymore. So basically you can set the same time every day, so your body and your mind gets used to wake up every day at the same time, even if it's a different time. Then also you can get dressed like if you're going to work, so you don't stay the whole day in pajamas or sweatpants, for example. And if you can, go for a short walk before you start working and after you finish work. So you can just take some fresh air in, you just simulate commuting, even though you don't get into the stress of getting into a crowded tube, for example, which is nicer. And then during the day, it should be all about productivity. So that's the challenge that we talked about, and something that you need to focus on. First of all, is to get a comfortable working environment. So you can either decide just to sit all day, and if you do, please make sure that you have a comfortable chair, a comfortable desk, or if you don't like to be sitting the whole day, you can just do some improvised standing desk, and you can alternate between sitting and standing. And then if you have specific activities that you really need to do, just block time on the calendar for them and make sure that you follow the calendar, and that you make sure that you're doing those activities without any distractions. Then afterwards, you can also, in order to avoid the distractions and too long breaks, just set limited break times, like 5 or 10 minutes breaks. And then also set a defined lunchtime. So you know that's your lunchtime, then you have lunch, you relax a little bit, and then you come back. And also set an end of the day time, so the blurry line between work and life doesn't get in the way. And of course, for all of these, it's useful always to have a list, to-do lists, and to define deadlines. So today is Monday. You can already do a list of all the activities that you would like to have done by the end of the week. So on Friday, you can go back to it and just read and see if you met them. And then, because not everything is bad about this, I think we can all learn how to appreciate this downtime, thinking about the long term, what learnings and what benefits we can take from being at home. So I'm pretty sure that you have realized that you have more time for your family, more time to exercise. You're probably eating healthier as well. There's less stress. You're saving money, you're saving time on commuting, for example. And so think about the benefits of being at home. Think about what you can take it from this time to the future, and also to improve our lives after we manage to go back to what it used to be normal. But the normal can be a different normal and a better normal as well. So that was it for common tips for everyone. Now, specifically tailored to scientists, which is basically, I think, why all of you are here today. So we divided these tips in 8 main tips, from basic ones like reading, writing, that everyone is pretty much doing, to more specific ones and maybe new ones for you, like tidying up the lab, making the lab more attractive, or the most wanted thing, planning the return, because everyone is really keen to go back to the lab and do some work. So first, very basic, reading more, checking literature. So right now, I think it's a really good time just to think about all the problems and the bottlenecks that you have in the lab, or that you were having, so that you can go into literature, read about it, and think about ways of going around those bottlenecks or just solve them. And because it's a downtime for other people as well, you can just reach out to authors of interesting papers for your own work, and just schedule 10 minutes call with them. So these are people that are still busy, most likely, doing just Zoom calls, but I'm pretty sure they have more time now than they used to have before. And a 10 minutes call, if you put it in a really nice way, I'm pretty sure they will be available to discuss and to help in your work. So that's more input, and it's always nice to have feedback. And then writing, of course, so if you have a paper in place that you're writing or about to start, it's the perfect time. You're probably already doing it. But then you can also get creative with a review paper. You can write a book chapter, for example, or if you're a master's student or a PhD student, it's also useful to think about those long and boring introductions that everyone needs to do. And so you can start taking care of that, so you don't feel like you're wasting time, but actually gaining time right now, so you don't have to do it later. And third, learning. So downtime, because you have more time, you might have some skills that you would like to improve, or that you were thinking about improving already, but the lab work was just too much. So right now it's the perfect time for it. So you can improve your writing, for example, communication skills, or if you are in a leadership or management position, just something around managing people. And then again, you can also go into very specific scientific content about experimental procedures, for example. And you probably know jov.com. So that's basically a scientific journal, but with videos only. And basically, they have very cool stuff, and it's all for free until June the 15th. So you can see like mice surgeries and very specific experimental procedures very well explained. And then on top of this, you can learn, for example, how to program in R. So R is a programming language. It's quite useful for scientists because it helps a lot taking care of statistics, data analysis, and just building nice graphs to put in your papers or presentations. And then LaTeX as well. It's a super easy. So it's a kind of programming language, but it's easier to use. You don't really need to code, but it helps with formatting documents like long papers, thesis, anything that is really boring and time consuming to do it on Word. LaTeX does it almost automatically, like all the formatting, all the index pages, references, everything. So if you get familiar with it, I can promise you that it will save you a lot of time and trouble when you're fighting with Word to format everything correctly. And then finally, there are plenty of free online courses. This link that you'll get, it's from Stanford. They have plenty of online courses directly to scientists, and one of them is Writing in Scientists, for example. And communication. So this is our fourth point. It's super important that you work on communication skills, especially because we all know that communicating science is super difficult, especially when it gets really complex. So it's also a good time now, since you have more free time, to explore new ways to explain your research to non-scientist people in basic ways, which will help you in the future as well, when you have to explain your work, or at least the goals of your work, to someone to give you money, for example, when you're applying for funding. So this is something that you will face a lot in your life, and if you have time now, you can start thinking about it. So these are just some examples. Videos, maybe some of you know ASAP Science. It's a cool YouTube channel explaining really well science. And then you can also listen to podcasts, or even participate or create your own. So you can educate people about a specific expertise or your area of work. You can write short blog posts and just share them to teach basic science. So if you work in immunology, for example, you might want just to help people understand what's going on with coronavirus. And then if you use this tool, biorender.com, it's a really cool website. I believe it's free for academics. And it's super cool in a way that allows you to create those professional images and schematics for your papers and presentations. So you can really explain complex things in a nice and in a way that people can just visualize what is happening inside our body, or in just a pathway, for example, and so on. And then planning. So when there's more time, it's also time to plan and think ahead, think in advance. And you can use this to plan experiments, for example. So if you have a certain experiment, you can just imagine how could that experiment go and what could happen. So if it happens that you get your expected results, and then there's one way to follow, like repeating, getting more replicas so you get more data, and then analyze the data. But what if it doesn't happen what you're expecting to happen? Then you need to understand why, repeat to different conditions. So if you start thinking about what could happen when you do a certain experiment, just thinking about all the possible scenarios, that will prepare you for when you're actually doing the work, to know exactly what's next step to take. So that's something that you can do. Of course, there are complex experiments, but you can always think about plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and so on. And this is a cool tool. So this is a Gantt chart for the ones who don't know. So probably most companies have something in place. So it's a project management tool. And this is a free link. It's on that link. You just download it. It's an Excel file. And it allows you basically to manage your projects according to the tasks that you have to do and according to a timeline. So let's say that you have a PhD project to do or a research project with a defined timeline. You can just put in all the tasks on the left, and then on the right, you just put in basically the timeline or when you expect to do them. So this one is starting in June, for example, which might be the time that you go back to the lab full time. And then it also tells you automatically what percentage of that task is completed or not. So it's an interactive spreadsheet, and it's quite useful. So you know what's the status of your research, what it's coming in the future, and what it's done already. And then regarding the lab itself, so tidying up the lab, that the goal should basically be that you don't go back to business as usual. Because I'm pretty sure that if you discuss in the team, if you get the whole team together in a call and just think about all the issues or the things that you would like to have improved in the lab, there's plenty of stuff that you can just explore and start thinking about it. So just take some time to reflect on the lab and the team priorities. Maybe you want to update and create detailed SOPs, for example, create new guidelines for people going back to the lab after some of the restrictions are lifted, that only a few people go in shifts, for example. And in that case, maybe a booking system might be useful. So you can check out Book It as well. I'll show you more details later on, but it basically allows you to have an overview of all the equipment in the lab, who's using what, who is using it in the future. You can also use it to announce maintenance periods, breakdowns. So it also helps with overseeing activities, overseeing equipment, and with communication, because everyone knows what's happening with each equipment at any time, basically. And then, of course, that these all builds up into streamlining and optimizing all the processes. So since the labs are closed now and that you're at home, you can just stop and think about all the things that you can improve in the lab. So then when everything and everyone can go back to the lab, everything is so optimized that you're not really wasting time. You just improved all the processes, all the things that people do in the lab, that when you go back, the research and the work gets done much faster than before. So that should be the goal, basically. And regarding the booking system that I mentioned, so this is Book It, basically. It allows you to have unlimited labs, equipment, and users. It's free of charge for academic institutions, actually. And it can also build up on several labs within the university. So you build transparency and collaboration across it. And it's also available for companies, although not for free, but we can discuss it later for sure. So if you're interested, just reach out. And making the lab more attractive. So this is a cool, nice thing that you can do now as well. So if you don't have a website for your research group or your lab, just check out some of the free tools online like Wix or Squarespace. You can do free websites super easily with templates already created. It's also a nice way of exposing the work that you do, making yourself more attractive. So imagine that you apply for funding, for example, and someone from the committee of the funding agency wants to see your work. So if you have a website, there's already a way in that they can get exposure and they see basically what you're doing. So if you don't have one, you can also think about creating it. And then finding ways of sharing resources and collaborating with our scientists. So everyone knows that collaboration in science is super key. It also makes you more attractive. You build reputation. So if you check out Cluster Market as well, which is an online sharing platform, basically allows you not only to see what other people have in the labs, if they make them visible, but also share your own resources, and which builds up on reputation, but also shows an additional reason for funding agencies to actually give you that grants that you're applying for. So we see an example below it from EPSRC guidelines in the UK. So it's a funding agency, and basically for buying equipment, if the equipment costs more than £138,000, they require that you explain everything detailed in what they call a strategic application plan. And this basically makes it mandatory that you come up with alternative business cases to show them how you're going to use the equipment. And one of the things they mentioned is really sharing the equipment with other labs. So if you think yourself, you're a funding agency, you have a certain amount of limited money, and you need to give it to a limited number of labs as well. So if you know that those labs will share the equipment that they will buy with other labs, then of course it's more likely that you give them the money than to other labs that won't share it with anyone. I think that's obvious. And then of course, because if there's a financial crisis in the horizon in the future, the science could also be an industry that will suffer. So less funding means that you have less possibilities of buying new equipment. So it makes even more sense to share what already exists. So that's all about making yourself more attractive and just thinking ahead and planning for the future. And basically this sharing platform, it's actually integrated with the booking system that I mentioned. So you can only not just manage your own equipment that you have in the lab, but then if that equipment has spare capacity, the system also allows you to see that and then to make it available to other labs so you can share it with other people. And then if you need equipment yourself, you can just search for it and see your colleagues and what equipment they are also making it available. So then you can also request it from them. And finally, what everyone is really looking forward these days, it's really to return to the lab. So planning the return, I think it's super critical right now, even though you're not sure how the government in your country is thinking about doing things. I don't think they are even sure about it. But anyway, so we are seeing some examples, and I would like to share them with you from other countries. So Germany and Denmark, for example, are two countries that are that lifted already some of the restrictions. We know that there's universities working already in the labs, and so there's more people working already. And what they're doing is actually adopting new safety procedures and new ways of controlling the number of people in the lab. And one way they're doing it is using a booking system. So basically what they do is that they divide the team into different groups of people and they assign them different schedules and shifts. Of course, that this can vary according to the work that you do. But basically, this is just an example. So 3 groups, different numbers of people. It's up to you to decide. And then I just divided from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., 12 p.m. to 6 p.m., and 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. Of course, you can rotate this, so not only the same people are waking up so early or staying in the lab so late. But basically, the booking system that I showed you, Book It, allows you to do this and to actually do not allow people from a different group to book on a different schedule than the one they are in. So they make sure that, first of all, there's not too many people in the lab at the same time. And then second, they don't run into each other. And basically, this is a way that you can already plan the return. And we're actually seeing labs in the UK just requesting the booking system because they are just thinking ahead on new ways they could go back to the lab without compromising any social distancing measures. So that was it from the tips. Right now, I'll just have some best practices to show with you. So I've just been interviewing some people from companies, but also from academic institutions. And these are some of the things that I've gathered that might be useful for you as well. So one is doing weekly meetings, one-on-one with the people that you're managing. So you just please check up on them and just see how they're doing, if they need anything, how they're doing also in terms of health, staying sane, staying positive, motivated. So this is really important, especially if you have people that are under pressure, like PhD students, where anxiety and stress levels are normally higher. Just check up on them, talk to them. I don't need to talk about work, just provide them some support. And then, of course, keep the lab meetings running. So most teams do weekly lab meetings, which is perfect. That's additional feedback that people get as well. You can just share with everyone what you're doing and also some tips. People can always learn from each other, so it's always useful. And then, of course, for these, communication tools are key. This is quite basic. Just Slack and Microsoft Teams, for example, are really nice to have the team in one place. And then Zoom and Google Hangouts, of course, for video calls like the one that we're doing now. And then on top of the live meetings, I think journal clubs can still go on. And you can actually take this chance to invite speakers from different countries to do just an online session and a presentation to the entire lab. So I'm pretty sure that you have colleagues in other countries that could just share some experiences. You can just collaborate with other labs as well and do joint journal clubs, for example. So just cool ideas that you wouldn't otherwise think of or even do because everyone would be busy in the lab. And this is super important now. So taking into account that there's a lot going on, people are under pressure, adapting to new realities, having to come up with new ideas to do some work when everything they wanted was just to go to the lab. So just make sure that you take the most you can out of their plates, so there's no extra burden on anyone. No one goes depressed or burned out, so they really stay motivated, positive, they see the benefits, and they think long-term. And then this is connected to respecting work-life balance and understanding the new reality that we are living in. So I've had people with dogs walking into the calls, babies crying in the background, all sorts of things that you can imagine, wives kissing the husband that was talking to me in front of me. So just understand the new reality. It's normal. It's the new normal. Everyone is in the same boat, and there's no really anything bad about it. So taking these into account, I would just like to show you and bring to the discussion the future of remote science. This is probably the part of the presentation that will take the most of the discussion, but it's all about basically what's the future looking like. So what if you didn't have to go to the lab after all? So this concept of cloud experiments, and it's really just, it's not taking off right now. I think there's some people working on it, but more now than ever, people are thinking about it because they can't go to the lab. So automation is already taking place. So I've talked to people that have robots in the lab, physically just transporting samples from one place to the instrument that is analyzing them, for example. And then another thing is that these instruments are being controlled remotely, either from the office because the experiment is dangerous, or they're just too lazy to go to the lab, or they are controlling it from home, for example. And they use software like TeamViewer, which allows them to control like pressure, temperature, pH, or anything that you have going on in an experiment. So you can do it remotely already. And this also will help bringing you a better working environment. So instead of just being closed in a cell culture room with no windows the whole day, just passing cells and changing media, maybe there's a robot that can do that for you. And maybe you can focus on more intellectual questions like designing experiments, thinking about next steps, writing papers, applying for funding, things that take a lot of time that normally go wrong because we're humans, and that also compromise reproducibility. But on top of that, I think it's also about health and safety. So if you're working with radiation, for example, maybe you don't want to be in the lab, just have a robot doing it and you're remotely and safely controlling it. Or for example, if you're working with virus and you have infected cells that you're dealing with. So if you want to put yourself in danger, just have machines handling it and you are safely remotely just controlling everything. So I think there are, of course, down points to this, and not everything can be automated or controlled remotely, but I think a lot of stuff can, and it will just, we'll see what the future will bring us. But basically, who's doing it already? So these are three very interesting companies. The one on the left is called Culture Biosciences. It's based in the US, and what they do is bioreactors on demand. So you have certain culture or a bacteria that you want to grow, and you just send them a sample. They will grow everything in their own facilities. And basically you can track everything and monitor everything live and online. You can even control the parameters like temperature, pH, humidity, pressure, anything on the bioreactors. And you can see actually what's the yield going. They will give you everything live, and they will send you everything afterwards. So you don't go to the lab, You don't spend a lot of time, just do everything remotely. Then Arcturus is a drug development company that you can do everything also, and you don't need to go to the lab. So you can just plan the experiments, track the experiments, analyze the data, and do everything without leaving your home. So right now it would be useful, for example, if you work in drug development. And then Cytera, it's a really cool company optimizing and automating very boring work, which is cell culture, as I was just talking about. And what they do is they automate all the process. So I talked to them actually, and they changed from the beginning of all of this, from going to the lab 3 days a week to going 3 days in 6 weeks. So basically all the cells and all the work that they're doing just to test their own devices, they control everything remotely. So the device basically changes the medium from the cells. They can also pass cells. They can control everything, which also decreases the contaminations risks, for example. So there's people doing it already. Maybe this is the future, maybe it is not, but I think there's some benefits in it, and we can discuss about it if you want. And just to wrap up this part of the future, this is something that Einstein used to do. So it's instead of actually doing, it's just thinking about doing it. So it's going from experiment doing to experiment seeing, and it's just about seeing yourself, imagine yourself doing that experiment step by step, and just try to spot the mistakes or the bottlenecks that you would find when actually doing it. So if you do this, you're basically training your brain to a scenario that did not happen yet, but when it happens, your brain already recognizes it because you were there with your mind, basically. So you're optimizing everything before you actually go there and put your hands on it. And if you think about it, it's not just Einstein doing it. So athletes, they get a lot of these advices from the coaches, which basically just tell them to imagine yourself just doing it. Imagine yourself just kicking that ball, just running that field, just jumping that distance. It's all about the technique and also seeing yourself doing things before actually doing them. This is just basically food for thought, but I thought it was interesting. And I just have two last things to talk about, just to mention very briefly. So we have a COVID-19 initiative that we're doing in collaboration with Cadence and Science Entrepreneur Club. So just sharing some measures, useful resources, and then of course getting up teams that need lab space and equipment, research teams that are working on COVID-19. And then we also just released an article on our blog that is all about what this webinar is about. So you can go in there and read it as well. So doing science at home. And there's another one at Science Entrepreneur Club about coronavirus and the vaccine as well. So I hope this was interesting. This is just some 10 minutes. If you have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. If you want to share some thoughts as well, just write about it. I'll just unmute you, and then you can share some things as well. I think Theodora wants to share some thoughts with us. I don't know if you want to speak now or if we can save it for later with anyone that is interested. Is there any questions, anyone? Maybe not. Maybe we can get Theodora to just briefly bring something to the discussion. Maybe it will open.
Sure. Let's see, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Can you see me? I don't even know.
No, but it's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Francisco and I had been chatting about last week, I think, about these thought experiments. So it's a kind of a new concept that I've been thinking about going forward. And it's something that I actually did during my PhD in Switzerland. So I had a very, very short period of time to basically carry out my entire dissertation topic, about 6 weeks. So I realized that, you know, I had like a one-shot chance of like getting this experiment flawlessly done. So I spent about 2 weeks really planning the experiment, but then more importantly realized that like I could close my eyes, I could go into the lab, I could see myself making reagents, I could see myself carrying out an experiment. And then most importantly, I think I could see myself making mistakes during the experiment. Like, oh, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. So I realized how significant kind of this concept of thought experiments was. And then, you start to read like Einstein and the work that he did, like all of his pivotal theories were really founded in putting himself directly into the experiment. And so I think we have this really unusual time and a break to be able to do just that, right? And to not just plan, but to experimentally see yourself and visualize this and basically make all of those mistakes before you even set yourself into the lab, so that you can save like time and money, um, cost on reagents and everything. So I think it's something really important for all of us to reflect on, maybe even to start playing around with and trying. So I don't know if anyone has questions or whatever, but this kind of thought experiment is something that I'm kind of wanting to push also as a facility manager of a core facility, and kind of writing some commentaries now that I want to publish and kind of get that dialogue out there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Eudora. That was really good. I think, there's a lot that we can learn from these times and improve in our lives in the future. And I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on this. So I think we have a couple of things in the chat to answer to. So Blaine, I'll reach out to you and see how we can help people with the qPCR automated machine that you have. I think it's really useful, especially because it's automated. I'll reach out afterwards. So thanks a lot for mentioning it. And Carmen mentioned other labs in Germany and Denmark are adopting new ways of scheduling and planning work. And she's asking for examples, basically. So Carmen, what we see, for example, in Germany, I had a lab in Cologne asked me to set up the groups in Phuket. And it was a very weird way, but I guess it's probably the way they have in the institute, which was to block any time between 10 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. So I don't know if there's any restrictions during the day, but basically they had two shifts, one from midnight until 10 a.m., which was a longer one, and then had a shorter one between 7:30 p.m. and midnight. So they basically want people, if people want to go to the lab and have to go to the lab, they might as well go during the night when there's no one in the streets, maybe that's their thought on it. But there's other people just using the groups on Bookit to split the team. So they know that some teams and some people might be willing to work more in the morning than and late in the evening, or some people might prefer to work late in the evening. So they will just get together, they split the teams into different groups. And what they're planning is, they're already doing it actually. So they're using Bookit, and what Bookit allows you is that two groups have different rules. So they have different schedules, and the system doesn't allow them to book on a different schedule than the one that they were assigned to. So that was basically the examples that we have. If you want, we can discuss later on how we can set it up for you as well. Not sure where you're based, but pretty sure that we can help you. And there's also a suggestion from Tony. Tony's just mentioning a remote experimentation company, Transcriptic. Didn't know about it, Tony. I'll Google into it. Looks interesting. Thanks a lot. Maybe more people want to check that out as well. Was acquired recently, so might be a good one. I don't know if there's anything. Yeah, Synthase, Blaine. Yeah. I think Synthase is a lot focused on automation. So they have their own programming language, I think. So it's basically moving biology to the digital world, which is also a very cool thing to do, and just automating everything so you can make experiments reproducible, more optimized, streamlined, and so on. I think everything that contributes to reproducibility already adds a lot to science, because that there's studies out there that says like 6 in 10 or 1 in 6 studies are not reproducible at all. And I mean, myself as a scientist, when I was in the lab, if my work was not reproducible, I was going to feel worthless, basically, because that's wasted time and money. And if we can assure from the beginning that the research that you're doing is going to be reproducible, why not, right? So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on reproducibility or just any other thoughts that they want to share with us. So Claudio is mentioning remote experiment programming is also possible with lab operator. That might be a software, not aware of it, but that's a good suggestion as well. So we have a company, transcriptic, and then lab operated as well. And that, I mean, that is something that I think we'll be seeing more in the future, and also because there's a need for it, especially, I mean, I know that academia operates in a different way than companies, but especially in companies where everything needs to be standardized and you need to make sure that you actually deliver and that everything is optimized towards the end goal. Basically, I think all these tools are quite useful. And of course, there's more money involved there. I don't know if there's anything else. So QR codes to label samples are also a cool way of organizing the lab, for sure. So you know what was everything and you just scan it quite quickly. And if anyone is interested, apart from Carmen and knowing how other countries are doing the returns to the labs as well, please feel free to reach out. I'll contact Carmen because she came up with it. But if anyone else is interested, I can just discuss it individually also, how you can do it. And I know that some companies are going to the lab just once a week or something, just to maintain some of the experiments or some of the work, and universities as well, especially if they have animals, they need to maintain them, of course. But if you're planning to go back to the lab, just let me know, and I can help you figuring out the best way of still coping with all the restrictions that will probably be in place for a while until there's a vaccine. But the research can't stop and the work can't stop. The show must go on and we can help. So I think, I don't know if anyone has anything else to add. Otherwise, I will just do it and conclude the session. I know that some people left already. So if there's anything else that you want to add, please do it now. I think some people are leaving, so might as well just let you go as well. So thanks a lot, everyone, again. Your presence is really very much appreciated. If you have any feedback afterwards, please send us. This was the 5th webinar, but there will be many more in the future. And I hope it was useful and interesting for you, and that your work can still go on, even though the situation we are in right now. So thank you very much. Hope you have a nice, lovely afternoon, and stay safe, everyone.